Okay, with this project we're going to create something that's kind of like a Greek, Romanish temple type thing so that we can see some new tools within Maya. I'm going to start out with a cylinder, and what I'm trying to do is just make a base with a bunch of little steps that lead up to the building. And I really don't want just an even circle all the way around, so I'm going to come over to my channel box, and on my subdivisions I'm going to change that to 8 so that I have more of an octagon type shape coming on. And with everything else we've done with programs, we know that if I want another one of the same thing, I can just copy and paste. But that's too much work. That's 2 steps, when I can simply in one step choose duplicate, which Command D or Control D is the shortcut. So if you duplicate something, it puts it right on top of the original. But if I get my move tool and bring that up, you can see that I actually do have 2 objects there. So I'm going to lift that up a little bit, and I'm also going to get my scale tool and bring that in just a little bit, so I've scaled and moved it. I could duplicate again and then scale and then move it, but again that's too much work, because under the edit menu we also have something called duplicate with transform. And that means that it remembers those little changes that I made after I duplicated it. So duplicate with transform. See how I got another one that also got smaller and also moved up. And the keyboard shortcut for that is Shift D. So I can hold Shift and just keep hitting that, and I can get a whole bunch of steps if that's what I want to do. Don't quite want that many really, so I'm going to delete those. And I'm going to show you one other way to get some extra steps here. So it is also in the edit menu under duplicate, but there's something called duplicate special, and I definitely want to open up the options on this. This is kind of like creating a little program to generate a ton of something that I need. So I wouldn't necessarily use duplicate special if I only need 1 or 2 more things, but if I'm creating a spiral staircase with 200 stairs, this is a great way to go. So for my extra stairs, I know I need to move them, so that's my translate. Note that I have a box for X, a box for Y, and a box for Z. So if I'm going to move up, that's my Y, and I'm going to highlight that little section, and I'm going to pick a number and put in there how high I want that to go. We can totally guess on this like I'm doing right now, but if you don't want to guess, you can actually, if you look in your channel box, the height of my stair is 0.189. So I actually, 1 would be way too big. I'm going to come in and do 0.189 here as well. So it'll move the exact amount up. I don't want to rotate this as my steps go up, so I'm going to change that to 0. And on scale, if you have it on 1, that means it stays the same. So if I want it bigger, I make the number bigger than 1. If I want it smaller, I go less than 1. In this case, I want to go smaller. So let's try 0.9 on the X and on the Z. I don't want to go smaller on the Y because that would change the height. I want my height to stay the same on my steps. Then I just have to decide how many steps I want. So let's say I want 10 more copies of my steps, and I hit apply, and I now have my staircase that leads up for my temple. So duplicate special is pretty cool. I'm going to close that. I was just doing 10 for demo purposes. I don't really want 10, so I'll take some of these off and delete them. 3's good. So I've got my platform, my steps that are going to lead up to my building. On here, I want to add some columns, and I'm going to switch to my 4-view mode. This is a great way to see why 4-view mode can be helpful. I'm going to get my cylinder tool, and over here, if I click and drag in my top view, it's easy to see how wide I'm making that cylinder. But then I can move my mouse down to the front view and click and drag to decide on my height. So it's just kind of nice to have them all open at the same time. I could up here get my move tool and try and move it around this way, but I actually want to use the top view to place this so I get it just right. The problem is that I can't see where my center step is versus my outside step. So I'm going to change this to wireframe view, and that just means I can see through things. To do wireframe view, press the number 4. And now I just see through everything. If I press 5, that puts me back to our standard shaded view. So 4 is wireframe. Now I can see all my shapes, and it's easier to grab that column and slide that over and place it exactly where I want it. I'm going to hit my space bar and come back so I can see my full shape here. Alright, so I want extra columns all the way around. Actually, before I do that, let's make our column a little bit more fancy. Let's put a box on the bottom. And I can see about how big I want that down here. I'm going to move my box so it's centered right under the column. Actually, I'm going to put the box there and then move my and move the cylinder inside it. When I look at this from the side view, my cylinder is actually dipping down below the steps, so I'm going to move the cylinder up a little bit. And then I want a box on the top as well, so I'm going to select that box, which actually is way too tall. So let's get the scale tool, make that shorter, place that right on top of the step. But then I'm going to hit Command D to get an extra copy and lift that up so it's at the top. So now if you look, it's just a slightly more detailed. I've got a box at the top and the bottom. And I want this set, this column, all the way around on each point of here. But in order to do that, we're going to use Duplicate Special again, but it'll be easier if it thinks of this as one item instead of 3 separate things. So I'm going to select all 3 pieces of my column here. And if I go to the Edit menu, I'm going to choose Group. And if I turn on my outline, and there's a button for that in our quick layout buttons here, see how it says Group in the outline, and I can open it and see there's my 3 shapes inside. I'm going to double click on Group 1 and rename it Column. So it's pretty easy to see what that's supposed to be. And so now anytime I click on Column in my outline, it'll automatically select the entire group. Next, I want to use Duplicate Special to make that move all the way around. Notice this manipulator, typically it's inside the center of our objects. When we did our group, it kind of put it in a funky place. You can come up and go to Modify and choose Center Pivot, and that puts it back in the center. Then I'm going to open up my Duplicate Special options. I know that I need 8 total columns, and I already have one, so that means I need 7 copies. Translate, I'm not moving it. This time I'm actually going to use Rotate, and the axes I want to rotate around is the Y axis. So I'm going to click in here, and it's actually 45 degrees that will give me even amounts all the way around. I don't want to scale it. I want to keep it the same size all the way around. So the only thing I'm doing is a rotate 45 degrees with 7 copies, and I'm going to hit Apply. Oh no, what happened? If we look, it made all our copies. We can see all our extra groups here in the outline, but it did it on top of itself. That's no bueno. So let's come up to Edit and Undo. And the new thing that we're going to see for this is that input point that it centers around. We can move that customly in a customized place to where we want to put it. So I'm going to go back to this foreview so I can see my top. You have to be in the move tool to move the input point. So I'm on my move tool. I'm going to hold down the letter D. So while I am pressing the letter D, I can then come in and move. Now let's try that again. I'm in the move tool. I'm holding down the letter D. There we go. Now I can click and drag, and this is my input point right here. Excuse me, my pivot point. So I'm going to put that pivot point right in the center of the steps and then let go of the letter D. So my group is here, but my pivot point is all the way over here. If I look at that in the perspective view, you can see the group is here, but the pivot point is over here. Now let's hit our apply, and you can see that it looped, or it revolved our copies evenly around for us. The last thing we want to do is get a dome on the top. And maybe I'll start out with a couple of just decorative rings. So I'm going to come back to the top view again. That makes it easy for me to see where the center is and how big I want to make this decorative ring. If I come back to perspective or even any of my views, I can see that ring is sitting down at the bottom, so I need to move that up to the top. Maybe it's still just a little bit small, so I'm going to get my scale tool, make that a little bit bigger, and move it up a little bit higher so it's not totally covering those blocks. Okay, so to create a dome on the top, the shape that's most similar to a dome is probably our sphere. So back in the top view, I'm going to get my sphere, and again click in the center and drag out. That makes it easy for me to see how big I want it. But I'm sitting down at the bottom again, so I've got to get my move tool and lift it up. The problem is I don't want this whole sphere. I want to get rid of the bottom half. And we can do that just by deleting faces. The best way to do that is to actually lift this up above so it's kind of out of the way of the rest of your model. Right click and go to face mode, and then come in and lift up and click and drag. Select the faces you don't want, and then hit delete. Then right click and go back to object mode so you're back on your dome, and we can lift that back down. So if I go look at this in perspective view, it looks like it's sitting on there okay, and I'm pretty happy with it. So at this point, go in and customize it. So if you want to add in just your own little awesomeness things here, so maybe I'll go in and select, I'm going to hold shift, click on these faces, every other one. And then from the hammer project, I know I can extrude, so maybe I'll just poke those out just a little bit, just to give it its own little detail. Maybe I'll right click and go to vertice mode, select that vertice on the top, get my move tool, and pull that up. But just go through and customize it a little bit, make it your own. And that is your Greek temple.